Welcome to Playing Above the Line, where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and community activists to get their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth.
Welcome to Playing Above the Line. I'm Alan, your host, and before we start the episode, I do want to acknowledge one thing, and I'm sure you can already hear that the audio quality for this episode is not what you're used to hearing from this podcast, and so I do apologize for that, but we are actually recording for the very first time fully remotely. What I mean by that is that I'm in my office in Bruton, Carrie is in her home office in Fairhope, and our guest, Rob Pearson, is in his office in Dempolis, Alabama. And we're trying to work through some equipment issues and trying to find the right combination of microphone and recording platform. So hopefully by the next time we do this, our technology will be where you won't even be able to tell that we're not in a studio. But we'll make the best of this today. And but I did want to go in and record this episode this way because I've been trying to get Rob on for a long time. He's a good friend of mine. And for whatever reason, we just couldn't get together physically. And so I thought, well, the next best thing is to try to do this via Zoom. And so that's what we're doing today. And so with that being said, Rob, thank you for joining us today.
Ain't technology great, Alan? I mean, we just a few years ago, we were using carrier pigeon back and forth, but here we are.
That's right. And I was telling Carrie before we started recording that I think this may be the first time in the history of the show that the guest actually sounds better as far as microphone quality than the host, because I know you're a radio guy. You do play-by-play for Dempolis football up there. And so you've got a pretty good little setup with professional headset and stuff. And so you sound great. I don't know how Carrie and I will sound. We'll figure this out as we go along.
Money will buy you anything, Al.
Right. Well, so Rob, you and I have been friends for a long time. We went to Stanford University in Birmingham together, and so I know a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today. And you are a partner at Mason and Gardner in Dempolis, but like me, you started out in industry in Birmingham. And so just talk a little bit about your background and what led you from Birmingham to home to Dempolis.
Well, as an Alabama fan, it's probably even weirder that I went to school in Birmingham to begin with, but I think as you will agree, it was a great move on our part to go to Stanford. Just unbelievable class that we had there and teachers and really the preparation that they gave us to get ready to go out into the world and do great things. But when I got there, I don't know that I knew, Alan, that I wanted to be an accountant. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And so I wised up and stuck with accounting, and really thankful for that. What's even funnier is, and I don't know if you felt the same way, Alan, but during classes and we're looking at taxes and auditing, and the whole time I'm sitting there going, I don't want to be in public accounting. When I was at Stanford, this is not interesting at all. I'd like to be with a company that I can kind of get my arms around and sort of love on and be a part of and really help improve this one company. And fortunately, out of Stanford, I was able to do that with Hannah Steele and really enjoyed my time there and did a lot of things while we were there, got involved in a lot of activities and worked with some really great people at Hannah Steele. But all the while, my mother, who kept on me about, you need to make sure you get that CPA behind you too, because that's important. And I didn't realize how important until I went to move back to Dempolis, and the job that was available was at a company called Mason and Gardner that had 4 employees, 2 partners and 2 other employees. And so I got into public accounting, and I love it. I absolutely love public accounting. I did not think I would, but it has really opened my eyes to what can be accomplished through a public accounting office. And so really thankful again for that journey that Stanford prepared me for all aspects of whether it was private or public accounting. But then as it turns out, I ended up using them. I've sort of been thankful for that winding path to get back home to Dempolis.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, let's talk a little bit about Hannah Steele first, because I know that Pete Hannah, big influence in your life, obviously. So
absolutely.
Talk a little bit about maybe what you learned there. And you were employee number 5 for Mason and Gardner, but now you guys have 2 locations, 13 employees. And so you're obviously growing. So talk a little bit about how you've seen your leadership style evolve over those years.
What's funny is there was a gentleman named Bobby York, who was the human resources director at Hannah Steele. And my first day on the job, I get there a little early. I probably got there 7:30 or so. Supposed to start at 8. And anyway, he's there drinking his coffee and reading the newspaper. And I walk in his office and ready to get started, sir. And he said, "Well, we're glad to have you." He said, "I'm going to just go ahead and tell you right in this first 5 minutes of conversation." He said, "There are 3 things that you'll do at Hannah Steel that will get you fired." Okay. So what are they? He said, "Do not fight, do not tell a lie, and do not discuss your paycheck. If you can keep away from those 3 things, you'll have a long career here at Hannah Steel." And I never forget that, because it's just so simple and really some pretty good rules to live by. And I tell people that here all the time. I said, these are 3 things. You've been warned. But we can live through just about anything else, right? And so that culture came from Pete. Obviously, he and Bobby York saw a lot alike. They were military background guys, and they sort of kept things simple as far as how people could relate to things. And when situations came up, they had I don't want to say elementary approach, because that's not it at all. It was very educated approach to things, but it's simple. And, right. There wouldn't have to be long formulas about how we dealt with situations. It was do the right thing. For them, it was just do the right thing. I feel like that has stuck with me, and they've obviously been very successful there.
Yeah, do the right thing can get you a long way in life, right? It's like you said, it's simple, but I think if people would just kind of back up sometimes and think about that, we would have a lot less conflict in some of the issues that we have have today.
Boy, you are so right. As Shug would say, you're so right, Carl. To give you an Auburn reference.
I like that.
Obviously you're right. And the world is complicated, but I think folks that have the ability to sort of get things down to where the goats graze, right, and where people can understand them and sort of simplify them and say, look, there's some truths here in this old world, and keeping folks grounded, I think, is very important.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you mentioned in the show primer is that being purpose-driven is important, and you think that's one of the things that kind of drives your leadership style and what you're doing today. So talk about that in a place like West Alabama. You're kind of in a situation like I am. My hometown, Bruton, Alabama, is a small town in South Alabama, and Dempolis is a bigger town than Bruton, but it's in a rural area in West Alabama, and maybe don't have all the things that you would find in a Birmingham or a Mobile or Atlanta. So talk a bit about going home and what that's been like, and why you have such a passion for improving your community.
Alan, you get it, right? You're in a small town like I am. It's home, so it's easy. We're biased toward our hometowns. Having also lived in Birmingham for a period of time, and Birmingham's not Atlanta, but it's certainly big enough to be called a big city. I was never at home in Birmingham like I am here in Dempolis. I think you understand that, living in Bruton, but would you have it any other way, really? The things that we get to do and in our hometowns have just been tremendous. When I moved off, and young people want to get out of town and sort of experience the world, but then you really don't realize how much you've given up by not being here. And so when I came back, obviously there was all those things that we enjoy about Dempolis and the river and hunting and the fishing and all that stuff that's easily accessible here. But what you find in a town like Dempolis is, a friend of mine told me very early on when I got back, 18 years ago now, he said, you're going to have to learn to say no, because people are always asking you to help with things or be on a board. So you have to learn to say no. And what's funny is I don't ever remember having to say yes to a whole lot when I lived in Birmingham. You didn't get involved in a lot of things up there, where in a place like Dempolis and Bruton, you've really got to, the community needs us, right? Your schools need you, your churches need you, your churches need you everywhere. But to get actively involved in things that go on at the church, the country club, the historical society, you name it. There's so many opportunities, baseball or recreational things, the football booster club. You could pick what you're interested in pretty easily and get involved in it pretty easily. And ends up, that's what makes the community.
Right.
What you kind of lose sometimes in a big town is you lose that sense of community, that sense of a small group that counts on each other and relies on each other. But you get back to a place like Dempolis and Bruton, and all of a sudden you find pretty quick that, sometimes it takes wearing out a pair of blue jeans here for you to find your place. But I always tell people, once you wear out a pair of blue jeans here in Dempolis, you'll never want to leave. And that has proven to be true for a lot of people. And because they end up getting involved in Christmas on the River, our big Christmas event, and they'll get involved in a baseball tournament or some other activities that take place here in the town. And all of a sudden they've made friends, they've, getting connected, they have some investment in the community. And it's a source of pride now. All of a sudden, you may not be from here, but all of a sudden you're proud of where you live, and you want to see it improve. And I tell you, one of the things about this area and Dempolis, if you don't know, is, and I know you know, but for people that may be listening don't know, is in rural West Central Alabama, in a part of the country called the Black Belt, and gets a bad rap for a lot of things. It's certainly not the wealthiest area in America, but the quality of life here is a lot better than people realize. And it's a very well kept secret. And we joke about it, how well kept the secret is about the quality of life here. And so when people come and they give it a chance, they see, oh yeah, you're exactly right. It's maybe it doesn't have an Applebee's, but it has, everything that we could ever want and need. And so it really, I get personally offended when people talk about how bad things are in my area. And so every time I get offended and mad, I have this need to do something about it, right? And so that then becomes the purpose. Okay, I'm going to do something about that. And so we have, over the years, been able to do a lot of things that has improved the image. And that's been one of my things I try to do here.
No doubt. And we'll talk about one of those in just a minute, because it was a big deal. But, you said, and you're right, I mean, in a smaller town, you do have a lot of opportunities to be involved and to kind of do things that you find passion in and that you find enjoyment in. And so I know that you're heavily involved in youth sports. You played sports in high school, and you do the radio play-by-play announcing for Dempolis High School. So I'd like to ask you about maybe some of the successful coaches that you've run across, or maybe some of the athletes that have gone on to the next level. I mean, what do you see any common traits or characteristics in them that stand out? I mean, when you look at some of the coaches that you've interacted with, I mean, what separates one from the other as far as success versus not, in your opinion? Or you can even extrapolate that to Alabama football. I mean, Nick Saban, obviously. And
on one of your previous podcasts, you had a guest on, I think from there in Bruton, that writes a blog about Alabama football and sports, and it's really interesting podcast, Alan. Y'all do a great job with this thing. But you asked him sort of a similar question about Coach Bryant and Nick Saban and what made them tick versus other great coaches, or other coaches that weren't as great. It hit me then, but I just wanted to sort of bring this up in a response to what was said. Both Nick Saban and Paul Bryant shared one common denominator. Neither one of them wanted to return to the life they came from. Coach Bryant had a fear of running a plow behind a mule in Morrow Bottom, Arkansas. Coach Saban has this fear that he's going to be back in West Virginia pumping gas. To me, that's kind of what separates those two from the rest of the pack. They're never really satisfied because they're scared to death they're going to have to go back and pump gas in West Virginia. Well, a lot of coaches, obviously, things like attention to detail, somehow getting the players, and I don't know, I don't have the secrets to this, but somehow the good coaches always get the best out of every player on their team. Every team has, quote, superstars. Some are more super than others, but those aren't always the players that win you the games. It's the guys that get no recognition in the trenches, or the guy that gets 10 carries instead of 20 as a running back. He's sort of the backup. So the coaches that develop the guys behind the guy, those are the coaches that end up being successful. And so, I've always thought in baseball, you can win games with a starting pitcher and 2 or 3 good hitters, but you win tournaments with your 5th pitcher and number 7 guy in your batting lineup. And the coaches that develop his whole team all along the way and not just focus on a couple of guys, those are the ones that end up being the most successful. And so, those sort of some of the things that you take from sports. And gosh, we love it here, and sports is always, obviously it's a lot of fun to keep up with if you played it and you kind of understand the game and that kind of stuff. But it's one thing that they keep score in, right? You know who the winner and the loser is when you leave the field. And so you don't always know that in business. You don't always know that in education and the different things that we're all involved in. There's not a clear winner and loser sometimes. Sometimes there is. But in sports,
Yeah, no doubt. And one thing that you said that I think is absolutely key, and I don't know that anyone has really ever put it in those terms before, but when you said the successful people develop the guy behind the guy, that goes for anything, right? You used it in a sports analogy, but that's absolutely can translate to business and all walks of life, really. Whatever organization you're involved in.
Yeah, and I'll go back to Hannah Steele, Alan, that I think they did a great job of over the years of developing the talent that came in the door. And so, somebody may start out at Hannah Steele stacking tubes in the mill, and the next thing you know, 20 years later, they've been trained and they're a supervisor, they're leading a group, or they're doing more specialized things. So Hannah really did a great job of investing in the people who were in their care. And I do think that that's what you're talking about, right? It's taking the folks that you have and investing in them. And I think they love you back for it, And I know that, my dad's case, he worked for Gulf States Paper here in Dempolis. He was on the startup crew in 1957 as an 18-year-old with a Pine Hill High School education. Gulf States Paper invested in him, and he invested in them. And 47 years later, he retired as the maintenance superintendent. So, Gulf States Paper is very successful because that was their culture. They trained their people, and it definitely made a difference to them and to our family.
Yeah, that's great. I want to hit on one thing before we move on to the 2019 Babe Ruth 14U World Series, which I think is a big deal. So I do want to find out about that. But I want to go back to success. We asked you, how do you define success? And one of the things that you said is that great people, organizations, and communities never seem to achieve success, at least how they define it. And so I think you can go back to Coach Brian and Coach Saban, right? They are always looking for continuous improvement. And so I think if either one of them ever said, all right, I'm done, I've achieved all that I want to achieve, that wouldn't be who they are, right? They're finally saying they've reached the pinnacle, but they never really have. They're always striving to be better and greater, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And I almost think you learn more from leaders' failures than you do their successes. Books will be written about Nick Saban and Coach Bryant and whoever else that's won national championships and baseball championships or whatever. Typically, people want to gravitate to those folks and find out what happened. What are they doing right? Well, I'm almost as interested in what somebody's doing wrong. And I think I've had some bad coaches over the years. And let's face it, we've seen bad bosses and we've seen bad coaches and we've seen people who they may be leaders, but they're not effective leaders. Coach Saban says, never waste a failure. And I really think that is some of the best advice that you can give anyone is never waste a failure. And even somebody else's failure, learn from it so that you don't make the same mistakes. And I have noticed in politics or corporate leadership structures or anywhere, there's probably there may be more, but there are three things that corrupt, right? There's money, sex, and power. And so when you all of a sudden believe that you have reached this success goal, then something starts creeping in. It may be power, which I think power is probably most corruptible thing that there is, but the other two are right there behind it.
Yeah, no doubt. That's great. So I do want to, before we move on, I do want to mention the 2019 Babe Ruth 14U World Series, which Dempolis hosted, because that's a really big deal. And you were, I know, an integral part of that. I remember talking to you back when you were trying to work out the logistics and when that deal was announced. And so just talk a little bit about what it took and just kind of some of the hurdles maybe you had to overcome to attract such a...
Alan, thank you for bringing that up, because we really are proud of that. And that for a town like Dempolis, first of all, it started with, it's like a lot of other jobs, right? If you want to come out of school starting at the top, become a well driller. because that's the only profession you start at the top at, right? Well, it's the same way in recruiting industry or recruiting a baseball tournament or even starting in accounting. You've got to sort of start with something. So, 15 years ago, we got associated with Babe Ruth program. They let us host a state tournament, and then they let us host another one. Then we got to host a regional. And finally, I mentioned to a friend of mine, Art Evans, who is retired here in Dempolis. He sort of volunteers his time to run the baseball leagues. And I said, Art, why don't you call our friend at New Jersey who runs the Babe Ruth leagues and say, you know what, Dempolis would like to be considered. I realize this is crazy, but we'd like to be considered for World Series. And it just so happened he had to go to Phoenix City, then he was going to Mobile, and he said, well, I'll swing through Dempolis and check y'all out. Well, that's all we needed to hear. So we roll out the red carpet, and we contact the local bank about borrowing their boardroom, and I contacted my friend in the Chevrolet dealership and said, hey, I need to borrow Yukon. And we have a wonderful sportsplex here. So baseball is not the problem as far as the fields and all that stuff. The hurdles that we have here in Dempolis really are two things. Hotels. We don't quite have enough hotels for a major tournament like that. And really, the one thing that I wanted to improve more than anything here, Alan, is self-esteem. And that's a weird thing to say, but it's that I don't want anyone thinking that Dempolis can't host a World Series. And so we set out to prove it, right? We decided that you know what? Again, going back to getting mad when people say negative things about your area. Well, look, man, if we can host a World Series, what can't we do? And so we set out to overcome those hurdles. And so things like hotel rooms, there's a local hunting lodge that pitched in and really helped us to put up an entire team. And we found other creative ways to house the players, and hotel rooms was a little bit of an issue, but we had one team that had to stay in Tuscaloosa, but for the most part, we were able to accommodate them. And then the restaurants stayed open late and were accommodating. They would actually take food to the hotel rooms for the players. And the town really showed out that weekend in that, when people came from as far away as Oregon and Arizona and New Hampshire and Pennsylvania, Texas, Florida, and they all came upon Dempolis, Alabama. And I'm sure they thought, what in the world are we doing here? They left with a different opinion because they wrote about it in their local newspapers, and they posted about it on blogs, and they told their friends and how really charming the people were. And I just couldn't be more proud of that, because that was really the goal. And it took a lot of community support and financially and volunteer wise, but there was a team of us that really sort of spearheaded it. And then we were able to, make changing our image the priority in hosting the World Series. And I really think we did that. And so, hopefully we'll get to host another one day.
Oh, I'm sure if you're involved, I have no doubt. But I just remember talking to you during that time, and you guys were just it was a great lesson in stick-to-itiveness. I mean, you guys hung with it and really made that happen. So I think that's great.
Alan, it's cliche, but it's very true. We had a committee. There was about 7 of us on this committee, and none of us cared who got the credit. Mm-hmm. That's been said, numerous times by numerous people that have seen it. So, but it wasn't one person. It wasn't even 7 people on that committee. It was it was an entire community effort. And in a lot of organizations need, and I think what we had was a vision of how we wanted this thing to turn out, and we were able to express it in a way that got buy-in from the community. And so, a lot of organizations need is a vision for what the outcome is going to be, right? And then if people tend to follow that. That was really what I think we had, and we had a bunch of unselfish people that were involved in the leadership aspect of it. And man, was it ever a success. So I was really pleased.
Yeah. And, just for our listeners, we're talking about a baseball tournament, but you take what Rob was just talking about and apply it to anything, and you will have some success. I have no doubt. All right. I don't want to get away without allowing you to mention your mentors. We asked all of our guests to give us a mentor or two, and you said mom and dad. So talk about mom and dad real quick and what you learned from them.
Yeah. I could write a book on mentors. Obviously, I think most of us could, but My mother was, she was a guidance counselor at the local private school and probably worked 60 hours a week because she cared about the place. She didn't hardly make any money doing it. And it was never about that. But her passion was unrivaled for what she cared about. And she just basically poured herself into that thing. And so she didn't really care what other people thought about how she did it. But she knew what she was doing was the right thing. And she had a unique ability to see a bigger picture on a lot of things. And so and she's the reason why I became an accountant, because she told me, Rob, you're going to make a good accountant one day. And I didn't even know what accountant was. So she just had the ability to, as a counselor, she made a good one. Now, my dad, you mentioned him, and he's a unique guy in that he had a work ethic that was unrivaled, and people talk about that at the paper mill still, about his work ethic. But he also drilled water wells on the side. It's like some people aren't satisfied with one job. He had to have two. But he never missed anything that we had going on. And somehow he fit all that in the schedule. And he was committed to our church, and he was committed to his job. And he really seemed to take ownership in. He didn't own Gulf States, but he acted like he did. He took everything personal out there. If a machine was down, he took that personal. He's going to fix it, or he's going to figure out how to fix it. That was the trait, I think, that I try to emulate the most. And really, Alan, one of the struggles we have here at Mason and Gardner, and I'm sure you do at Adviso, is you really want to take ownership in your clients the same way. You just have so many of them. and it's maybe hard. It makes it harder when you're at Hannah Steele. You can easily, wrap your arms around this one thing, right? But when you're placed at a CPA firm like ours, the difficulty is you really want to show that same sense of ownership with every client you have. Successful CPAs are able to do that. That's been the hardest thing to do to me in public accounting.
No doubt. Well, I can tell you that I know that you think, as I do, that the importance of mentors cannot be overstated. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention this lady. I mentioned her before on the podcast, but you and I both had the privilege of having Dr. Kay Guess as an accounting professor at Sanford.
Oh, yes.
She's retiring this summer from Sanford. Yep. And getting that letter just kind of brought some things back to my mind as I look back on her. And I do consider her to be a mentor to me. Now, we didn't have a formal mentor-mentee relationship, but I absolutely do not think that – I know I wouldn't have got my first job without her, okay? She played a direct role in that, and she helped instill a love of – and this sounds weird, but instill a love of tax and accounting, in me that really made me want to pursue the career that I ultimately ended up in. So she's a great lady, and I can't say enough about the impact she had on my life.
And Alan, she didn't settle for status quo either. You and I both know that she started some things there with our class and in our program that had not been done before, because she felt like this is the next step and this is the things that needed to be done. And I mean, she just wasn't going to do what we've always done. She was going to do things differently. And you and I have a lot of our success or whatever, we owe it to her because she thought outside the box. So when she came in, she started the accounting club and she started recruiting things that now we take for granted at colleges because they all have them. But Sanford didn't when we started. She started those. I really owe a lot to her. That's for
Whenever
sure.
I think about passion for what you do and a passion for the people that you quote serve, she's the person that comes to mind, because you're right. I mean, we recruit at Sanford now. So there's a big accounting interview day every spring, and with booths, and they're probably, 20, 25, 30 companies there. But her first year at Sanford, which was our junior year, she had 10 or 12 people to her house for dinner, right? And she invited 2 or 3 or 4 business people that she knew in the community in Birmingham to dinner at her house. That was the accounting interview day. And so it grew from that to what it is now. And so she just, the passion, she had it. So it's great.
Yeah, I'm like you. I don't remember, but about 3 employers that were at that dinner. And almost didn't really know what we were doing there,
right.
At the time. Now they kind of come to expect you sort of get it, but at the time it was brand new to us. And so, but she knew, she had a vision for what she wanted to accomplish, and man, we were the beneficiaries of that.
No doubt. Rob, I could talk to you all day, don't have all day, but I appreciate the time that you gave us and what I know is a busy time for you. But before we go, I do want to ask you just one thing. you, like me, have been through a lot, seen a lot, worked for a lot of different people, and just lived life. I mean, we've been out of college for 25 years or so now. So if you can go back and give 18-year-old Rob Pearson one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think that, my dad has over the years been good at sort of reminding me of this, and sometimes you have to be reminded, but I really think the best piece of advice you could give anyone at any age is to listen to God and do what he's telling you to do. So many times we want to just sort of follow our own path, I guess, so to speak. But good Lord has plans for us, and he sometimes gets you there whether you want to be there or not. But his plans are better than ours. Again, we all kind of have to be reminded of that. But when you're young, you don't know what you don't know, right? So there is a higher meaning to all this stuff, and so I'm a big believer in that, obviously, and the purpose for everything. And anyway, that would be it.
Sound advice, Rob Pearson. Thank you, sir. Thanks for your time. If people want to check out Mason & Gardner and what you guys do, we'll link your social media and website in show notes, and so folks can go there definitely and see what you guys have going on. So, Rob, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Alan, always a pleasure, buddy. Good to talk to you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. And as always, a big thank you to producer and editor Carrie Wolf. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avisogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.